back in. Today we're discussing our must-draft defenses plus our top 12 rankings heading into 2025. Let's go ahead and get right into it. First things first, I just want to talk about a few rules here when it comes to drafting defenses. One, never draft a defense first. Never be the person who drafts a defense in the 13th round because it thinks it gives you an advantage. It really doesn't. The number one defense last year scored just over 10 fantasy points per game. There's really not a huge edge when it comes to that. And also, we're just really wrong about a lot of this when it comes to ADP because ADP last year, only 5 defenses drafted inside the top 12 finished inside the top 12. And even worse, none of the defenses that were selected in the top 5 finished among the top 12 defenses last year. So there's no real reason to do it. This is one of the most volatile positions year over year. So you don't need to be the person who thinks you know and you're going to take the Broncos in the 11th round because you think it's going to give you some huge edge. Just there's way too many variables when it comes to this. Secondly, never draft more than one position that you can only start one of. I can get it if you're drafting like a Tucker Kraft because you want to take a flyer on him and you really like him this year, but you also want to take Tyler Warren. I'm not opposed to something like that. But drafting more than one defense is ridiculous. Really, the best option is really just to stream the position. You can try to draft a defense a little bit earlier. We'll talk about some of those defenses that you can do that with, but you don't need to be overdrafting a defense. If you can get them in the last 2 rounds, I'm perfectly okay with it. But more often than not, streaming is always the way to go. Lastly, we're hunting sacks, we're hunting turnovers. Simply and honestly, just simply focus on weeks 1 and 2. I think those are some of the best things you can do. Second, defense is far more about matchups than anything else, like I've always talked about. Implied team totals on a week-to-week basis is one of the easiest things you can go look at. Google it. There's all kinds of sites that put that information out there every single week. See which team has the lowest implied team totals that week. And then try to find the defenses going up against them that are available in your league. It's pretty much that simple. But without further ado, let's talk about some of the top defenses, some of the top 12 defenses that we have heading into this year. First, we have the Denver Broncos. They are the DST1, being drafted 155th overall. The Broncos enter 2025 as the top defense. The Broncos finished 2024 as the number one defense in fantasy football, leading the league in sacks and defensive touchdowns. They were also far and away the best defense and the only defense to score 10 plus fantasy points per game last year. Broncos had the second highest pressure rate and the 11th highest amount of drives, ending in a turnover last year. They will be returning 14 of the top 15 players last year from their defense. Only Cody Barton is leaving. They also signed Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga from the 49ers. They also spent their first round pick on Jedi Barron. When it comes to the Broncos, it has more to do with cost than anything here. Unless they can be had with their last few picks, I will not be drafting any Broncos this year because there's inevitably going to be somebody in your league that takes them much higher than they should. Next up is going to be the Texans, DST6 right now, 190th overall in ADP. Finished last year as a DST5. They were 5th in sack rate and the 13th highest pressure rate. They also turned the ball over at a very high rate with a turnover on 14% of offensive drives, which was top 6 in the league. The Texans returned one of the best sack duos in Will Anderson Jr. and Daniel Hunter to go along with one of the better secondaries in the league, anchored by Derek Stingley. The Texans are a more affordable option that could produce similar fantasy points to the Broncos. And then lastly, the Vikings I want to talk about here in my top 5. The Vikings transformed their defense into one of the best units in 2024 with Brian Flores at the helm. Jonathan Greenard and Andrew Van Ginkel both had double-digit sacks last year. They improved their defensive front with the additions of Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. Last year, the Vikings had the second highest percentage of drives ending in a turnover and the 6th highest pressure rate, as well as the 4th most sacks. The Vikings figure to be well positioned to build off this defense. They figure had the second highest scoring defense last year at 9.5 fantasy points. Now, some of my must-draft defenses that are inside this top 12. First one is going to be the New England Patriots. The Patriots finished 31st among fantasy defenses this past season, scoring 3.7 fantasy points per game. So why would I have them as a top 10 defense heading into 2025? Well, first thing is they brought in Mike Vrabel, and Mike Vrabel has done a very good job in his coaching career. His defenses typically punch well above their weight and play much better than people expect. The Patriots invested heavily on that side of the ball as well. They went out and signed Milton Williams, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, and Carlton Davis to go along with Christian Barmore, who should be back this year, as well as breakout star Christian Gonzalez. The Patriots also have one of the easiest schedules in the league this season. It could experience a quick turnaround, similar to what the Broncos did, who went from 27th in points allowed to in 2023 to 3rd in 2024. So I really like the Patriots, and they are a very cheap defense to be able to target. Next up is going to be the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks were highlighted in this video last season, and they were making another appearance this season after finishing as the number 6 scoring fantasy defense last year. They finished 8th in pressure rate with the 8th, as well as 8th in sacks. They weren't as opportunistic as finishing 17th in turnovers, but they made several additions this offseason to keep the ball rolling with DeMarcus Lawrence, Nuwasu from the Chargers, as well as Jonathan Hankins to provide much needed depth and pass rush. They also have a pretty favorable schedule to start the season. 49ers isn't great, but then after that, you get the Steelers, Saints, Cardinals, Bucks, and Jags. So I do think the Seahawks are another defense that we can look to target this year. Lastly, Arizona Cardinals. Now, I could have put them as a streaming option. They were much better last year than I think a lot of people anticipated. They finished with the 13th most sacks and but with 27th in pressure rate. They improved in that department by adding Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat has averaged a 12.8% pressure rate and over 8 sacks per season over his last four. They also added Dalvin Tomlinson, ageless wonder Calais Campbell, and first round pick Walter Nolan. So in the secondary, they allowed 7.3 yards per attempt, which was 24th, but they really put on the clamps, which they got inside the red zone, allowing a 3.7% touchdown rate, which was sixth best in the league. So they have a very favorable schedule to start the season. They open it up with the Saints, and then they'll get the Panthers, the Titans, and the Colts before they get to their week 7 or week 8 bye. So I think there's a lot to like here with the Cardinals, especially if you just want to stream them for week 1. I think they are a very good option. I really like what they've done with this defense. I think this defense is going to take another step forward this year, and they are available at DST 20. So let's go over some streaming options for week 1. Let's go start with the Los Angeles Rams. They're drafted right now at DST 22. Everyone thought the Rams were going to be a disaster last year on the defensive side of the ball. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, they finished as DST 13, were a top 12 defense in 8 of their final 12 games. They have one of the youngest defenses in the league as well, with rising star Jared Verse, and there's plenty of optimism that they can keep this thing going. Lastly, they have a pretty favorable schedule to start the year with matchups against the Texans, Titans, Eagles, and Colts. So I do think the Rams are a very solid streaming option for week 1. Next up is going to be the Washington Commanders, DST 24 right now in ADP. The Commanders finished for the number 24 fantasy defense. However, they did rank 13th in pressure rate and 11th in sacks. They didn't make any huge splashes this offseason, but they certainly added some depth with Von Miller, Javon Kinlaw, Dietrich Wise, and Jacob Martin. In the secondary, they also brought in Marshawn Lattimore last year at the trade deadline, but with injuries, he really wasn't the same guy. They also drafted Trey Amos in the second round of this year's draft and signed Will Harris. The Commanders start off 2025 with a juicy matchup against the Giants and then get the Raiders in week 3, as well as the Falcons in week 4. So I do think there's a lot to like here with this Washington Commanders defense here, especially early in the season. Another defense you could look to stream. Next up is going to be the New York Jets. The Jets will face off Steelers in week 1. They were one of the best run defenses in the league last year, allowing the 5th lowest yards per carry and the 2nd lowest yards before contact in the league. They also ranked 4th in pressure rate and 11th in sacks last year. Well, they did lose some pieces in Javon Kinlaw, Solomon Thomas, but they did replace them with Derek Nandi, Byron Cowart. They will also get back Jermaine Johnson, who tore his Achilles in week 2 last year. Should be ready to start the year, but the Steelers last season allowed the 4th highest pressure rate and the 9th most sacks, making the Jets a top 10 streaming option and a top 10 option for week 1. Lastly, let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Browns. The Bengals are certainly not a team that we're going to be talking about on a week-to-week basis as a streaming option. However, a week 1 matchup against the Browns will fit the bill. The Browns offense will likely be run by either Joe Flacco or Kenny Pickett, which doesn't really inspire a whole lot of confidence. The Browns last year allowed the 3rd highest pressure rate and the 2nd most sacks. I know a lot of talk has been surrounded Trey Hendrickson, but unless the Bengals decide to trade him, I highly doubt he sits out any games. It costs players a lot of money in terms of fines now to miss actual games. And we're used to be able to forgive those fines and just wipe them off the table. Those are no longer an option when it comes to a contract and when it comes to that money. So if he sits out multiple games, we're going to be talking about millions of dollars that he is going to miss out on. I don't see that happening. I think either he gets traded or he is going to play week 1. So I really like the Bengals here in this matchup against the Cleveland Browns. So let me know in the comment section below if you think I missed anybody, whether it's must draft defenses or among the streaming options for week 1. So let me know in the comment section below. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.